Yamuna Tira Vanachari Shivaradhari Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय O my Lord, the all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my reciprocal obeisances unto you. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayamudiriye. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer his respectful obeisances to the personality of Godhead, Narayana, and Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. I Nashtapreshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. The regular attendance in classes of the Bhagavatam and reciting that devotee. All that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and therefore the personality of Godhead, whose beautiful songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. I was born in darkness, ignorance, and the spiritual master opened my eyes with a torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Hare Krishna. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto, titled Liberation. In the verse. Okay.
We read from 15 to 23 and then we'll focus on verse 23.
Okay, so translation, right?
Translation.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thereafter, from Buddha, through the womb of Ila, a son born named Paurava, who was described in the beginning of the 9th canto. When his beauty, personal qualities, magnanimity, behavior, wealth, and power were described by Narada in the court of Lord Indra, the celestial woman Urvasi was attracted to him. Pierced by the arrow of Cupid, she thus approached him. Having thus pierced by Mitra and Varuna, the celestial woman Urvasi had acquired the habits of a human being. Therefore, upon seeing Paurava, the best of males, whose beauty resembled that of Cupid, she controlled herself and then approached him. When King Paurava saw Urvashi, his eye became jubilant in the ecstasy of joy, and the hairs on his body stood on end. With mild, pleasing words, he spoke to her as follows. King Paurava said, "O most beautiful woman, you are welcome. Please sit here and tell me what I can do for you. You may enjoy with me as long as you desire. Let us pass our life happily in a sexual relationship." Lucy replied, "O most handsome man, who is the woman whose mind and sight would have not been attracted by you? If a woman takes shelter of your chest, she cannot refuse to enjoy with you in a sexual relationship. Dear Paurava, please give me protection to these two lambs who have fallen down with me. Although I belong to the heavenly planets and you belong to the earth, I shall certainly enjoy sexual union with you. I have no objection to accepting you as my husband, for you are superior in every respect." Urvasi said, "My dear hero, only preparations made in ghee, clarified butter, will be my eatables, and I shall not want to see you naked at any time except at the time of sexual intercourse." The great-minded King Paurava accepted these proposals. Paurava, "O beautiful one, your beauty is wonderful and your gestures are also wonderful. Indeed, you are attractive to all human society. Therefore, since you have come down of your own accord from the heavenly planets, who on earth would not agree to serve a demigoddess such as you?" Aho rupam aho bhavo nara loka vimohanam kona seveta manujo devim tam swayam agatam. Aho rupam aho bhavo nara loka vimohanam kona seveta manujo devim tvam swayam agatam. Ahorupam ahobhavo. Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevata manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam.
Ahorupam ahobhavo.
Ahorupam ahobhavo.
Naraloka vimohanam.
Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevata manujo. Devim tam swayam agatam. Ahorupam ahobhavo. Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevata manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam. Ahorupam ahobhavo. Ahorupam ahobhavo. Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevati manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam.
Ahorupam ahobhavo.
Ahorupam ahobhavo. Naraloka vimohanam.
Purna sevata manujo.
Purna sevata manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam. Ahorupam ahorao.
Naraloka vimohanam.
Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevata manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam. Ahorupam ahobhavo. Naraloka vimohanam. Purna sevata manujo. Devim tvam swayam agatam. So we'll do the word for word translation. Aho, wonderful. Rupam, beauty. Aho, wonderful. Bhava, postures. Naraloka, in human society or on the planet Earth. Vimohanam, so attractive. Ka, who. Na, not. Sevata, can accept. Manuja, among human beings. Devim, a demigoddess. Tvam, like you. Swayamagatam, who has personally arrived. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Paurava replied, O beautiful one, your beauty is wonderful and your gestures also wonderful. Indeed, you are attractive to all human society. Therefore, since you have come of your own accord from the heavenly planets, who on earth would not agree to serve a demigoddesses like you? Purport. It appears from the words of Urvasi that the standard of living, eating, behavior, and speech are all different on the heavenly planets from the standards on this planet Earth. The inhabitants of the heavenly planets do not eat such abominable things, such as meat and eggs. Everything they eat is prepared in clarified butter, nor do they like to see either men or women naked, except at the time of sexual intercourse. To live naked or almost naked is uncivilized. But on this planet Earth, it has now become fashionable to dress half naked, and sometimes those like hippies live completely naked. Indeed, there are many clubs and societies for this purpose. Such conduct is not allowed, however, on the heavenly planets. The inhabitants of the heavenly planets, aside from being very beautiful, both in complexion and bodily features, are well behaved and long living, and they eat first class food and goodness. These are some of the distinctions between the inhabitants of the heavenly planets and the inhabitants of Earth. Hare Krishna, everyone. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words on the King of Scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam. So thank you for having me here. And today is Yogini Ekadashi, so it's a very sacred day, and also it's International Yoga Day. And it's also the National Indigenous Peoples Day. And it's also past the summer solstice. So it's a really good day, a good period we're going into, because oftentimes, in the winter months can be quite challenging for many devotees because it's really dark and cold, and a lot of devotees don't visit us. Most of the visiting guests who come to Toronto come in the summertime, but winters are tough, but they build character. And now we get into the thick of things in terms of the summer weather, and there's lots of different activities for outreach, Sankirtan, and but it's tough, sometimes going through the ups and downs being a devotee in the north, because not seeing the sun for so long or so gloomy, it's a bit unnatural for our bodies. But we're obviously in the heavenly planets, as we see here, they have a different standard of living. It's a much higher standard of living. So who here has been attending the past few classes, Bhagavatam? Okay. So maybe I'll just give a little context of where we're at. So we are reading this chapter, which is King Purava, enchanted by Urvasi. And just to give you a little context, so where the chapter begins is we have Garbhodakai Shri Vishnu, who has the navel sprouting from his navel, the lotus flower. From that comes Brahma, and from that comes Atreya Rishi, right? Apparently I'm related to Atreya Rishi. That's my Gotra. But anyways, that's my past material life. With Krishna consciousness, it's, Achyuta Gotra. Then comes Soma. So Soma is the moon god. And Soma had kind of this asuric trait, which is kind of the wicked trait. And the Bhagavatam always has these fights between the divinity and demonic or sort of evil traits. Now in our lives, when we think about it, we have to fight between kind of the divine source and the sort of wickedness. And maybe if you have that picture, it'll be good to put that on. I remember doing a program on International Yoga Day in Calgary, Kirtan Lounge. I don't know if you were there, maybe. And we had our International Yoga Day, so we said, okay, well, read the yoga scriptures. And we had somebody from Mexico visiting, and she took a Spanish Bhagavad Gita. So it was really cool. All right, so here's a beach. I went to a couple of weeks ago on a work trip. I'll give a little bit of an explanation here. So this is Crystal Beach. It's one of my favorite beaches to visit in Ontario. And it's the lake is Lake Erie, which borders Ontario, New York State, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and maybe a little bit of Michigan. So as you see this, we obviously see the sand, right? So you can see the kind of the borders of the sand. Can you see it here? Okay, perfect. So you see some sand that's really like white sand, and it's dry sand, right? And then you see the sand that is in the middle where, it's a little bit wet, so it has a darker shade, right, with the birds, standing on it. And then you have some sand that is, even because of the reflection of the water and the sky and the sun, it looks a little lighter shade. But that sand is very wet. So the individual soul, that is us, we are influenced by different energies, right? We are known as the marginal energy or the Tathastha Shakti. So we are kind of like the sand in between, right? So let's assume that the lake, which is practically like an ocean, like the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, it's like the ocean of birth and death. It's like the material energy, right? And the sun is Krishna. So we can be influenced either by the sun or the divine energy, the divine qualities that's enshrined in the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, so forth, or we can be enchanted by the material energy, right? So we are kind of in the middle, right? And we want to go towards being the dry sand, being more saintly in nature, but everyone has a choice. In life's all about decisions, and every day you have a conscious decision you can make. Can I get closer to Krishna? Can I progress ahead in my Krishna consciousness? Or do I just remain stagnant and the ocean just takes me away? Or do I rush towards the ocean? Right? So we have all these choices. So that is the Tathastha Shakti. It's the part where we are influenced by both. And, it's up to us to whom we want to choose. So similarly, in this story, we have the moon god Soma, who is taking this more asuric sort of nature. But we shouldn't think of the Bhagavatam characters as, okay, well, that's an asura, that's a sura, that's a divine person. And think of it, okay, this is a story. I'm going to close my Bhagavatam, and, that's just, life is good. No, we have to think about ourselves too, because if we self-reflect in our own practice of Krishna consciousness, we must see to it that where was I 6 months ago? Where am I right now? Where do I want to go? Am I progressing in my Krishna bhakti? Is my natural love, inclination for Krishna increasing? Am I following the words of the spiritual master? These are all very relevant. And we should always think that, okay, I have these influences. How can I go more towards the spiritual influence? So sometimes we look at, the character like Soma and say, okay, well, he was very asuric, right? So what did Soma do? Well, Soma kidnapped Tara, and Tara is the wife of Brihaspati, who was the priest of heaven and all the spiritual master of the demigods. So you may say, okay, well, kidnapping, well, that's not good. Then he had a lot of false pride, right? So false pride, again, is a negative quality we want to avoid: anger, greed, so forth. And then he had a son, Buddha, and then, and then you have the 6 sons, Ayu, and so forth. So essentially, you see the demons and demigods, they always fight. We see this sort of thing. So similarly, in our world, there's always this friction between, hey, we can cheat Krishna and be away from him. It's actually very easy, but it actually requires a lot of effort to remain in Krishna consciousness. Who thinks that's true? It really takes effort to be in Krishna consciousness. So it's like an airplane, it's like it has to always have that thrust, right? Otherwise, if you're no thrust, then you'll just kind of glide, right? So you want to have that thrust, because I've even heard from, Srila Prabhupada disciples that how come you're in Krishna consciousness for like 50 years or 40 years or 60 years? And how come some just kind of came to the movement, had prasadam, came to the classes, but kind of went away? And their answer was the constant endeavoring to make that effort to remain in Krishna consciousness. Because if you put yourself in autopilot mode, then you get the material energy engulfs you like the waves of the ocean. So we have to be very mindful of that. So there was something interesting where, so Tara, there was a fight between the demons and demigods for her. And then Tara, who spent time with Soma, came back to Brahma, and she said she was pregnant. And then there was a whole fight between, the Soma and Brihaspati as to whose child it was. So it seems almost like the original Jerry Springer show. And those of you who get that reference who probably lived in North America, you understand. But the Jerry Springer show, I won't get into it, but it's just a show where, it's a very, very degraded aspect of Kali Yuga and who's the father of who and stuff, and all this is the original one of that. So then they found out that Brahma, who I guess would be, more of a fatherly, kind person, Tara was able to confide in him. And then she said that, it's the child of Soma. So then she went under the care of Soma, and then this Buddha was born, so Buddha meaning intelligent. And basically in the Buddha and Ila, they had the son King Paurava, who married Urvasi. And we see that Narada described in the court in heaven about this Paurava, right? So just description. From this description, Urvasi heard about Paurava, and she wanted to descend onto earth. So we see that, in the Vedic sort of context, the power of hearing is so powerful, right? Like just by hearing about Lord Krishna's qualities, we see that, Rukmini wrote a letter to Krishna, right? So the power of hearing is the very first sense we come into this world in the material body, and the last sense before we leave our body. So therefore, Shravanam is very scientific. It's not just a matter of sentiment that Prahlad Maharaj says, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, right? So Shravanam is very important. So the vibrations we surround ourselves with is extremely key towards guarding our Krishna consciousness. Second, when we think about the plant of the bhakti plant, right? We want to protect our bhakti practice. So today being International Yoga Day, the highest yoga is Bhakti Yoga. So how do we protect our own bhakti practice? Well, we must guard ourselves by, typically when you have nurturing a plant, you have a round fence sometimes around it. So you guard yourselves by having boundaries. You do things that are favorable for you in your Krishna consciousness, and you reject that which is unfavorable. And each individual person here, you may be in a different stage of Krishna consciousness, and what may appeal to you in Krishna consciousness, that you must do. I asked, one brahmachari, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, some of you may know him, that what is devotee association? We talk about devotee association all the time. So he mentioned that it should be like-minded devotee association. Just because one's a devotee doesn't mean you go to them, because they may be practicing Krishna consciousness in a very different way than you would, right? So there's also different spectrums of Krishna consciousness. Some people may be very orthodox, some may be a little more pragmatic about how they do things, some people are a little more flexible, so some people are a little more artistic in their service of Krishna consciousness, some people are a little more philosophical, some people are just, engaged in service, practical service. So there's different shades, and whatever inspired us in Krishna consciousness to start with, we should always stick to that, because that will always give us that enthusiasm. In order to be successful in Krishna consciousness, one must have enthusiasm, one must have patience, adherence to the different rules and regulations. So enthusiasm is the key, right? Without enthusiasm, then it just kind of becomes like a mechanical, dry process. So we should try and find those activities, those devotees that enlivens us in Krishna consciousness, and stick with that process, so that we always find that it's always self-starting and always enriching. So here we see that Narada just describing, Urvasi was attracted, and so that's the backstory. So going to the verse 23, seeing that the standard of living, eating, and behavior and speech are all different. Now, obviously, as devotees, the heavenly planets is not something we aspire to go to. We just want to be with the Vaishnavas. And either we want to go to the spiritual world to be with Krishna, or we want to come back to the material world and serve in ISKCON again. So, we always pray that Chakudan Diloye Janme Janme Prabhu se. So if the spiritual master comes back because, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is, going in different directions, then we must also follow and come back and serve the society. So it's either beneficial to be on earth, where we can practice our Krishna consciousness without being enamored by the glamour and name and fame of the heavenly planets, or be in the spiritual world, because we can be in connection with Krishna. Oftentimes we see that people want to make the earth a good place, but that can only happen to a certain extent, because a higher sense of happiness, a higher quality of happiness can only be attained, say, in the heavenly planets. But the best place that we want to go is that which is just beyond anxiety, beyond, so it's called Vaikunthas, beyond a place with no anxiety. And then we as Gaudiya Vaishnavas want to be in Goloka with Krishna. And if not, with the spiritual master. So that's the back in this world doing service. So that's where we want to be. That's kind of our mood. And our mood is also to be sharing Krishna consciousness. Now, sometimes when we share, it becomes quite challenging when we go out there. How do we become humble? How do we become patient? Oftentimes we wonder, how do we acquire these qualities? How do we become more realized of the philosophy? How do we see Krishna in the heart? Well, this happens when you go outside of your comfort zone and go out and distribute books, or go to a yoga studio and talk to people. You're actively engaging in the process which will connect you to Krishna. And then when you go to bed at night, then you're like, okay, well, I was able to do some service to Srila Prabhupada's movement. And that's really key. Otherwise, we just think, okay, well, what's the practical manifestation of my service? So therefore, Prabhupada says that it's to live almost naked is uncivilized. So I believe in 1967, when Srila Prabhupada was in San Francisco, he had gone north, past the Golden Gate Bridge, to this sort of hippie commune, where it was full of these sort of nudist colony. And Prabhupada preached to the nudists. And he saw right through them. And, it's kind of hard to imagine, because, sometimes these days people just get a caricature of what Prabhupada was, but they forget about Prabhupada's, very compassionate, flexible nature. They just focus on the strict, Senapati Guru Prabhupada, but they forget about, well, Prabhupada had to go through a lot of, different experiences in the early days. And, he was there speaking about Krishna to people who were not clothed. And then from that experience, one person liked what Prabhupada said, so he put on his clothes and he came to the San Francisco temple. So that's one experience from my readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. And in terms of food, I think this is kind of a challenge that I see, across the world, is good quality food. Like one of the best quality foods you can get is like at a devotee farm, where you have food that's organic, the fertilizers from cow dung, it's done in a very holistic manner. And one of the sweetest, I would say, apricots, it almost tasted like candy, was from Sharanagati village in BC. And I never realized that. You taste the same apricot in a farmer's market, it has no taste. And that's something that's been really disappointing in not only in the Western world, but even in the East, is the quality of fruits, vegetables, grains, so forth, dairy products, is not very good, right? And I recently visited the US, and it's like, man, the food there, it's very, very bad, especially commercially available. Here, you have some restrictions on, certain dyes and so forth, but the quality of food is not there, which means the nutrition isn't there. So oftentimes this is the nature of Kali Yuga, that nutritional value of food kind of goes down. And unfortunately, if you're in poverty or poor, then you can't afford good food. That means you oftentimes don't eat good food. So that's an unfortunate symptom of Kali Yuga, that even though they may be making these sort of food production facilities and big factory farming, but what's the nutritional value? Nutritional value is important. So therefore, quality is very important. We talk about the moon god, Soma. Srila Prabhupada looked in the sky And, in terms of the Hare Krishna movement, in terms of numbers, we may not have the most numbers, but in terms of quality, that is what Srila Prabhupada wanted. There's one moon and there's many stars. And everyone looks at the moon, right, at night. So therefore, we want to be like the moon, have good qualities, practice in a nice way, leave people in a good impression, right? You leave people in a good impression in public, they say, oh wow, such a nice person. How can I be like that? Why? Because influences in the material world is all about backstabbing, gossiping, getting over one another, stepping over one another. How do we transcend this? We transcend this by being in Krishna consciousness. So that's some of the qualities that's mentioned here. So obviously we don't aspire to be in the spirit in the heavenly planets, but we should try as much as possible to look after our body well by nutritious food, exercise, so that we can serve Krishna. Like Srila Prabhupada often went on japa walks, and it's actually June, which marks 50 years since Srila Prabhupada came for a walk here in Toronto and Woodbine Beach. So, very well. The 50-year anniversary, and we did a japa walk out in Scarborough as well. It was just so nice to just be by Lake Ontario where Srila Prabhupada came. And Srila Prabhupada wanted to, show us something better, a better alternative lifestyle than what everyone's living. And for that, we must be eternally grateful. If you want challenges, for example, here it says it's uncivilized people. Well, even in the heat of India or wherever, part of Vedic culture is also to dress in a way that's very modest, right? And even if you look at like the dhoti or the sari, the key is the light fabric, right? With a light fabric, you can cover yourself very well and be very presentable, so that you're not showcasing that I'm the body and I'm here to show off the body, right? So that's a key point. But in terms of nudity, like, Sukadev Goswami has no clothes, right? And Rishabdev has no clothes. And what about the 4 Kumaras, the 4 Brahmacharis? What about the 9 Yogendras? They have no clothes, right? And then Lord Shiva's consort, Ambika, she had no clothes. So we have all these examples of Bhagavatam as well, but they are of a different quality altogether. They're of the mindset that I'm not of this world, and I'm not in a civilized sort of commune, and I'm just, completely absorbed in Krishna. So that is completely different, right? So we must understand the nuance of that, right? So simply wearing clothes doesn't make you saintly. It's your consciousness, right? And obviously, in the modern day society, we want to dress in a modest way, right? And Srila Prabhupada gave us, who's the Acharya, he gives us the way in which to apply the scriptures. We look at the scriptures by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, not that we look at Prabhupada through scripture. So that's one key distinction we make. Is for us, Prabhupada's everything, there's the preeminent Shiksha Guru. Because oftentimes people may, from traditional Vedic society, they may look at Prabhupada from the perspective of scriptures. They say, oh, he's just a guru, But our perspective is very different, that our window towards scriptures is only because of Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada gives us that vision and illuminates that within us. For example, like we have the brahmacharis here. But in the Bhagavatam, the way a brahmachari is totally different. They're not like this. No shaven hair, they're like matted hair and so forth. Even a sannyasi is supposed to wear deer skin. Right? But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected that because of time, place, and circumstance. So we have to present ourselves in a nice, clean way. Right? And next week, if you want to come to one of the most challenging places to distribute books, is Pride Festival. And we see a lot of naked men. So it's, having, lived in Calgary where it's so conservative and you don't see that kind of stuff here. But to go out on books, it's definitely not a place for a brahmachari or sannyasi. It's very challenging, but somehow the other devotees go out there and they make a small attempt in, in sharing we are not this body with people, and people are very receptive. But in doing so, we have to tolerate so many things, and it's one of the most, from a sense, from a sense sort of perception or overwhelming the senses, it's probably the most challenging place to distribute books. So, so this is kind of seen there, and we just have to simply, tolerate it. But it's not for everyone. So not everyone goes to those sort of events. And I remember going to it 2 years ago when we were there, and 3 years ago. But it's very innovative that the Toronto Sankirtan team goes to everywhere and anywhere to preach about, the philosophy of Krishna and Krishna consciousness. It's very unique that way that they kind of go and do it, and that's why they're, the best in doing so. So that's what I have to say about this. I'll take some time for any questions or reflections based on anything that I said or any questions you may have. Hare Krishna. Question?
Yes, Prabhu. As you said, to stay within under bhakti, we have to see the boundaries and see the like-minded people.
Yeah.
But if we work as well, or we go to college, there we don't have devotee friends.
Mm-hmm.
So how to not be rude with them, but again, we should not imbalance in our bhakti, even if we have to talk with them, like how to maintain that.
Yeah. So His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu gives a story where there's the monkey makes friends with the crocodile. Right? So it's kind of odd because usually crocodiles like to eat monkeys. So the crocodile goes back home and interacts with his wife, the she crocodile. So I made friends with the monkey. And she says, you know what I really like? I really like the monkey's heart. He says, well, I don't want to kill him. I was like, well, you must do this for me. So crocodile says, okay. So then the crocodile says, oh, monkey, why don't you jump on my back? I'll take you somewhere. So the monkey goes. So the crocodile's going, and the crocodile is feeling guilty. He's like, you know what, monkey? I'm kind of taking you to my wife because she wants your heart. The monkey's like, really? I left my heart up the tree. And the crocodile's like, oh, you did? Okay. And the monkey says, just take me back there. I'll get the heart for you. So then the crocodile goes back. The monkey climbs a tree and says, well, see you later, alligator. So with respect to your work and respect to your university, we must look at it from the perspective that we don't leave our heart at such places. We go there as a matter of duty and obligation. Do your duty as a student and as a professional, but do not leave your obsession at work. And it's a fine line. Like I can actually feel, I apply this all the time, that when my work is done, I never talk about work. I just think about, well, my relationship is with Krishna. So you got to start your day like that. My relationship is with Krishna, and what can I do to be engaged in Krishna service? I have to eat, so let me cook for Krishna. Okay, I have some extra time on a weekend, so let me read Bhagavad Gita, let me associate with the devotees. And what you're doing is, you're doing what you can, right? It's not about comparing with other devotees. Oh, well, he's living in the temple, or that person gets to, go visit the devotees more often. I don't think that's very helpful. What's helpful is you compare yourself with your own situation. So where were you 6 months ago? Whatever stage in Krishna consciousness you're in, and where are you going? Are you increasing in your bhakti, or are you just stagnant? Or are you getting frustrated? Are you getting enlivened? Are you getting enthusiastic? Are you gaining these sort of qualities that are these magnanimous qualities? So you should measure yourself. So look at your schedule and say that how practically can I do something that is sustainable? Like when I go and see, obviously my service is book distribution, but even with book distribution, it's not like I go on book distribution every day, right? It's just not possible with my schedule, right? But what I can do is, okay, in the summer months, a few weekends in a month, I'll go on books. Or I'll keep books in my car so that if I meet someone, I'll distribute a book. So am I going to be like Prana Gauranga Das Brahmachari distributing books every day? No. But am I still having that book distribution in mind according to my capacity? Yes. So if we do our part in terms of our own spiritual practice and service in Krishna consciousness according to our own capacity, then you'll find that there will be reciprocation with Krishna. Krishna will give you open avenues and ways in which you can increase or sustain your bhakti practice. So what you should do is make an attempt to look at your schedule and see, is it really in my best interest to be scrolling on my phone, or should I just be sitting down and reading or chanting or associating with devotees? And if you find these sort of nooks and crannies of spaces in between, try and do it. Like, for example, one thing I started to do maybe since 2020 was read Srila Prabhupada's books on a daily basis. Oftentimes, because I had the student mentality, okay, on a Saturday I'm going to read an hour and a half of Bhagavatam. But the practical challenge with that is, after a week you kind of forget. So I was like, okay, why don't I just say 10 minutes a day I read something. So right now I do about 10 pages of Chaitanya Charitamrita. So you get through the Chaitanya Charitamrita quite quickly, and also you get some daily food for spiritual thought. So it's sustainable practice. Whereas Srila Prabhupada recommended, 1 hour of reading, right? But it's tough for many of us who are not in the ashram to do that, right? So for me, what's sustainable is, so instead of we shouldn't take the all or nothing game, right? Oh my God, 1 hour or I do nothing. So for me, what I do in my household life is 10 pages. And it doesn't take me more than 15 minutes because, it's mostly just shorter words. So hope that answers your question. All right. Okay. Question?
So I think continuing the same question, you said, in short, you mentioned birds of same feather flock together.
Yeah.
Whether the devotees, whether philosophical, artistic, or,
Yeah.
orthodox. So everyone is within, in the same aegis of Krishna consciousness, but we often see at times they become self-proclaimed leaders of their particular boat, and they talk about, oh no, this is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
If the boat is not deviated, that's still fine. However, they're going ahead.
Yeah.
That's okay. But they would want to be, oh no, this is the best way to do, and the other one would say, oh no, this is the best way to do. We often see that on management groups. We often see that on different places. So, what's your take with that?
So with that, we require to have maturity in the way which we understand the whole, movement and philosophy in a holistic way, right? And oftentimes conflicts within, Krishna consciousness can arise because what is your upbringing? How did you come into Krishna consciousness? And this remains very, very core to who we are. Just think about it. Your identity as a devotee is so important to you, right? That is so crucial to who you are as a person. And if someone says, what you're doing is not right, or what you think you're doing things better, then this can create really harsh conflicts, because that is your core identity, right? And we talked, I went through a few courses in GBC College about this. So the way we should understand is understand things in a very mature way that, okay, a certain person has a certain upbringing, they came into Krishna consciousness this way, and therefore they imbibe these values, and they feel like this is the way that we should do it. Or they keep Prabhupada in the center, but they focus on a certain, statements of Srila Prabhupada, and then they don't focus on certain other statements. So it becomes kind of spiritual, scriptural bypassing. So when we look at that, we must understand what was his mood, right? Because ultimately, if you look at the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we look at the 7 purposes, number 1. Number 2 is not only the teachings, but the teacher. What is Srila Prabhupada's mood? And the best people that I find for that is Srila Prabhupada's disciples who have been in good standing in the West. Because here is where they've gone through challenges in the 80s and the 90s, where ISKCON did go through some challenges, but they have, gone through that and have been around. And I find those to be not, ultra this way or ultra that way. They follow Krishna consciousness in a very modest and practical way that does not deviate from any principles, but at the same time is flexible to accommodate how we can share Krishna consciousness. And oftentimes people get very passionate that this is the way Krishna consciousness, this is what Prabhupada wanted, and this is what, but again, are we understanding it from a holistic perspective where we take sort of the, staunch, uncompromising statements with some flexible details and look at it in a holistic manner? Or do we just see a person who is so absorbed and think this is the right way? I look at it from the perspective of we have to appeal to different kinds of people in the world. And therefore, there's going to be different leaders of study groups or Shiksha gurus and so forth who will imbibe a different mindset, right? And the way I look at it is, instead of saying one is right and one is wrong, I say, okay, these are the different spectrums of Krishna consciousness in the way in which they apply and teach, and we should be accommodating. Right? We should consider all of them to be okay. We are all trying to do the same thing, but appeal to different people. That's how I look at it. So that's why I have friends, and I've taken pictures with very conservative people and very liberal people, and I'm liked by everyone because my mindset is everyone has an intrinsic value. Whereas if we become go on the liberal side and say, okay, let's ban the conservatives and from doing this, then we kind of fracture the society. So my mindset is everyone has a value. That if I'm in South America, the way in which I share Krishna consciousness is going to be different from South India, right? Maybe we're very orthodox, conservative there. Here it's like, okay, well, we might have to cater our cuisine in a different way, our speech in a different way, but everything's good. But the problem comes is when I think my way is the right way, and another person says, no, my way is the right way, and then they don't talk eye to eye. Right? Whether it's the liberal or the conservative, they'll say, okay, I'm not going to talk to you, you're not going to talk to me. As opposed to saying that, okay, I have my way, you have your way. We are trying to we have the common platform of chanting Hare Krishna, following the devotional principles. So we don't break any principles, but the details are flexible and they should be accommodated. But if those two sides appreciate it, that, hey, you are doing something different in Bolivia, and I'm doing something different in Ukraine, but we're all trying to do the same thing, then we would have a lot of harmony in a spiritual society. So it really requires that broad vision to realize that, hey, you and I are doing the same thing, but in just different ways. But when we don't do that and think we are doing the right way, then it's sort of this false ego or false pride that, kicks in, and it creates fractures and disharmony. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions relating to this or anything else? Oh yes, sorry.
So, Prabhu, you made a point like to remain Krishna conscious, you have to make constant effort, or you might be drowning in the material ocean.
Yes.
And you say like patience and enthusiasm is the key, but it might be not like we have to make an effort. But how can we keep up with our patience, and how can we increase our enthusiasm?
Mm-hmm. So you keep up with your patience and realizing that whatever you endeavor to go ahead in your Krishna consciousness, nothing's going to come automatically or instantly. Oftentimes we want instant gratification or instant validation, and that's not always going to happen. So we must always remain faithful. So Shraddha, firm faith, is required in that. And enthusiasm, find that which gets you enthused in Krishna consciousness. Like, for example, I'm a little more philosophically inclined, so if there is a program that has no philosophy at all, it's like, man, there's no philosophy, so it's like, I kind of go away from it. But if there's something that, really enlivens you, engage in those kind of activities. And whenever you approach anything in Krishna consciousness, whether it's playing an instrument or doing some service in the kitchen or reading, my recommendation is always to approach it in a mood of love and service. That before I approach the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam, I'm going to approach it with a mood and sort of consciousness of devotion. I'm doing this with love. right? So set that intention before you begin that activity. That intention is also very important. So if you set the intention that, I could be doing so many things, but I want to spend this time with Krishna and I want to do this, then do it. Like when we go on book distribution, we're not there to sell books, right? We go there as instruments of Lord Chaitanya, and we imbibe the mood. We offer obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, take the blessings, and hit the pavement. Whether we distribute 0 books, or 1 book, or 10 books, or 20 books, it doesn't matter. We just try and imbibe the mood and see what happens, what interaction takes place, right? And not be attached to whatever happens or doesn't happen. So that mood is very important before you do anything, right? And when you imbibe that mood of, okay, before I do something, because oftentimes if we don't embody the mood, then we sort of become like robots. We mechanically chant japa, we mechanically do a service, we mechanically have interactions with people, as opposed to the human side. And oftentimes the human side of Prabhupada gets forgotten. So unless you read Srila Prabhupada's, biographies, you don't realize that when Srila Prabhupada's disciples fell sick, he says, oh Yamuna, are you doing okay? Srila Prabhupada had that sort of side to him, right? Or when I showed the picture of the beach, right? And the devotees used to think that anything outside the temple used to be Maya, right? But then Prabhupada, when the devotees were in the water, he gestured like this, that play with the water, have fun, right? So we often forget that you should also take time for yourself to do that's what's good for you, right? An example that I like to give is I love to spend time in nature. It really calms me down. My Ayurvedic nature is kapha, so I like the earth. So, have a japa walk, go for a nature walk. We organize things all the time where we live, and it gives me, great calmness and sereneness to kind of balance the intensity of the Krishna conscious practice regimen of chanting japa, reading books, doing worship. Have something to give you that sort of gateway to keep your enthusiasm going. And also devotee association. You see another devotee who's more advanced than you, who's always enthusiastic, you can gain so much from their energy. So try and be along with those who give you more energy than those who kind of sap your energy away. Right? All right. Any other questions or points? All right. Hare Krishna. Yeah.